This is Dan. I'm the developer of Gravia, and this is a quick video on what things look like at the end of Sprint 2 of Gravia's development. This sprint I was mainly working on getting the first-person controls in place and dealing with the player taking damage and dying and respawning and some of the effects around that. And there were also some audio effects that I introduced for dynamic footsteps and to make the sound behave differently depending on where you are. So I'll just walk you through some of the prototype areas that I have and show some of some of that functionality. First thing to notice is that there is a soundtrack that will play in any level from now on. Each level should have different soundtracks, but it should be fairly subtle in the background, and this soundtrack is currently playing and it will keep playing as you move from area to area. So I'm going to go into the damage room and show some of the damage effects and dying effects when you get killed in the game. So this room has a bunch of these red temporary damage dealing sources, and these just hurt the player if he gets too close. They also may knock the player back in the direction that they're pointing, and each one of these does a different amount of damage. So if I step into that one, it'll hurt me only a little, whereas this one will instantly kill me. So I'll just step into this and show what the death effect is. So kind of a typical player ragdoll effect, and right now it's using a temporary model to show the player. That will be changed in the future, but this was just a free asset that I found. That's good enough for now. So anytime you die, it tells you what the cause of the death was, and in this case that little damage dealer is just called prototype damage. So we restart at the level, and that was just an instant hit that took all of the player's health all at once. If you take some damage that doesn't kill you, we show a damage overlay on the screen, and I'll just kind of walk through this major damage really quickly and get out of it. So a few things happening there. One is you'll notice that the music, some kind of anxiety music, kicks in as your health gets low, and as your health recovers, the music goes away. And we have this kind of red border around the edge of the screen to show you that you are close to death. And lastly, we have this kind of a red arc that points in the direction of whatever the source of damage was. So you can see that that gets bigger as you turn further away from it, kind of indicating that the source of damage was further away. And it always points to where it came from. So in this case, the damage source is the floor, so it's kind of pointing down to the floor. Over here we have a damage source from above, and you can see that that little indicator is pointing up. This one is pointing straight on, so if we get hit by this one also knocks us back a bit. But you can see that that damage indicator is pointing to the right and now to the left. Always just points at the direction of wherever the thing came from. So if you got shot by something that was far away, we'd say that the source of the damage was wherever the shot came from. Okay. Next up we have some falling damage. So the player can survive some falls, but not all of them. So this distance would be safe enough, but this one would be hurting the player. And this one all the way at the end would be a fatal fall if they were to fall all the way down there. So you can see falling off of this, everything's fine, no damage. But if I fall off from here, it causes a lot of damage, but the player can survive it. And if we go all the way to the edge here and jump off, fatal damage and the player is killed. And it tells us why we fell. So right now you can die from falling, you can die from these red sparkle things, and this landmine is just going to shoot you right up in the ceiling. And in cases where you got hit in the head really hard, we just say that you died of head trauma. So there's different reasons for getting killed, and it's useful for the player to know what actually killed them in a game where it could have been the forces that they were thrown or something else. Okay, so that's about it for the damage taking and the respawning. Next up we have a little bit with checkpoint logic, which isn't all that exciting, but in some of the larger levels there are checkpoints that once you've reached them, you don't have to replay everything before it. So this is a little test level for checkpoints. And if I go over here and get killed by this damage dealer and respawn, I start over at the beginning of the level where I started. But if I reach this checkpoint, we'll see a little indicator. That's just a temporary icon at this point, but there's a little indicator on the screen that shows you that you've reached a checkpoint. And from now on, if I die and I respawn, I start over at that checkpoint that I reached. There is a slight delay once you've reached the checkpoint area before it actually acknowledges that you've reached it, and that's just so that you can't kind of fall and kill yourself into the checkpoint and still trigger the checkpoint. So if you're going to hit a checkpoint, you have to survive it for a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds before it allows you or it records that you've hit that checkpoint. Okay, last up we'll look at the some of the audio effects that have been added, and I'm just going to go to that scene first and load this up. So two things to show here. The first is dynamic footstep noises. So any material or any surface in the game, I've set it up so that you can flag it as being made of a certain kind of material, and that will change what it sounds like to walk on it. So this standard floor right here, you just hear kind of basic footsteps. This floor here is supposed to be made of hollow metal. So you can see a difference in what that sounds like. We have a wooden floor here. This is some broken glass. This is a kind of a muffled area like it was a carpet or something. So very quiet steps. This is snow. All of these are just kind of sound effects that I had available just to test this out. Probably not all going into the game. And then this is some gravel. So the idea is that this is all very easy to use. I can just assign a material to each of these, or any kind of floor, and whatever the player happens to be standing on, that's the sound that we use for the footsteps. Okay, and next up is some audio effects. There are areas in the game that I want to have sound different, depending on kind of like whether you're in a cave area or whether you're in a large room, and there's a lot of audio processing that you can use. The idea here was to allow me to trigger different audio processing effects to be used just dynamically based on where the player moves. So right here I have two different audio zones set up, and the way that they work is the closer you get to the middle, to that purple area, the stronger the effect gets, and if you're just on the edge of this kind of brownish area, it'll be pretty mild. So right now you'll hear kind of a sound effect in the background, some explosions and some chiseling sounds, and that's just so you can tell the difference of when I step into this area. So if we start moving into the cave, you'll hear that in the cave it's all kind of echoey, and you have a reverb sound come out of that, and it all sounds a lot more flat again. But that's all dynamic based on the player just getting in closer to the middle of the structure or not. And the vacuum is like if you were in an area with not very much air, so the sound isn't going to travel very much. So you can see it has kind of an underwater sound. You can't hear the chisel at all anymore. And you can just barely hear the explosion. Just kind of the low stuff carries through a little bit, but the high stuff is gone. And again, if you start hearing it kind of come in and out depending on how close you are to the middle of it. Okay, that's about it for Sprint 2 and first-person controls. We'll see you next time.